Jimmy Casas, my guy. How are you doing today, man?
Oh, it just reminded me about something. I was watching a Saturday Night Live skit the other day, and what's his
Because you have the time.
He's hilarious. He goes, no, you got to say it the right way. It's my man. Like Denzel.
Oh yeah. No, I remember that one with Pete Davidson. Yeah, he's like how Denzel says it. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I remember that. That's a great clip. Yeah, that's great. But so I got all kinds of light stuff going on right here. I am in northern Wisconsin. Fantastic, so beautiful. It's such a beautiful place up here. But hopefully we can kind of get at least a little bit of light in that situation and kind of go from there. I am so pumped up to be here. Thanks so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule. I'm sure you're not doing anything at all this week.
Well, you know why you're pumped? Because you're not looking over your shoulder in a parking lot. So life is good. Life is good.
I will tell you, as soon as we got off the call last week, I started looking around. There are cars everywhere. It happened again. I can't believe it. You can't make it up. Like maybe it's just the time they're having like tournaments or whatever during that time. But every time I try, again, it's not a good look, Jimmy. It's just not. It's not a good look to be in an old van in a parking lot of an elementary school with nobody around. It's not a good look. I'm just gonna say it out loud. It's just
if you're gonna do it, get like a Buick LeSabre or something.
Yeah, right. That's right. If I had the other car, it'd be okay. I think it probably wouldn't be great, but here we are. Here we sit. So, man, it was a great week getting out and talking to people. But at the same time, I think a lot of questions that came up this week were really about how do we make sure that we get momentum along the way, not only for leaders but for schools, communities, and everything that goes around with it. And a lot of times, what was very interesting to me was they're all talking about how you find your voice in the work that we do. And a lot of times people don't want to talk about the work that they do because we live and work in a service organization. And when you serve kids and communities and the public, at some point along the way, service and silence became the same thing. And I don't know where that happened, but you don't have to be silent to serve. Like you can serve and you can talk about it. And I think one of the things that I was thinking about was, is there a way that we could help people with that part of it? Because, we can talk about the ideas and everything that goes along with it, but is there a way that we can get, help people, almost like amplify their own voice in terms of the work that they do or the work that their team does? And I think one of the things that I say to our group a lot, or said to our group a lot, or say to the groups that I go speak to a lot, is if you don't want to talk about the great things that you're doing, I can't stop you from that. But that doesn't stop you from talking about the person that you're working with or the group that you're with, or you can tell the story in a way that doesn't feel like look at me, right? Which I think can be off-putting as well. But that doesn't preclude the fact that you're doing great things, and a lot of people in your organization are doing great things. So what do we do to make sure that we can help people kind of see the value of all of that work in a way that allows them to kind of celebrate the great things that are going on around them while also amplifying the stories of those in their space? I think the things that when we talk about books and we talk about speaking and we talk about podcasts and we talk about blog posts and all of the things that we can do to amplify, one of the things that I always try to come back to is it helping the person that we're setting it, that we're getting it to? Is it helping the audience in a way that allows them to get better and feel better about the work that they're currently doing, right? And does it amplify the voices of the people that we work with that allows them to walk taller, and with more confidence and do everything that they do in their space, feeling better about that work? And if I keep coming back to those two things, create value for the people that we're talking to and amplify the voices of the great work that's happening around us, I feel so much better about telling these stories, because it doesn't feel like, hey, this is what I did. Because it's not what I did. It's what we did collectively. And we can talk about it in a way that allows us to really kind of move those things forward.
Mm-hmm. No, I completely agree. It's funny you say that, right? Because especially as educators, I don't know what it is about our profession. I think it's just because we're such a humble profession. I think that's part of where people struggle to share their stories. But, it's always a reminder, and you've talked about this, Joe, a lot of times. And, I know George talks about it in terms of amplifying your voice. And because we know things are going to happen in our schools that don't necessarily bring a positive light on our schools. Right? There's always going to be some incident at schools. But People love to be negative and blame the school or blame the kids or blame something. And so we have to understand that if we're not sharing that story, if we're not sharing our voice, then all they hear are the negative things that come out, right? And so, we need to, make sure we're sharing those stories. So if we share 50, 60, 70 stories and then an incident happens, hopefully it isn't as magnified as much because they have all these other positive things that continue to happen. And people are saying, yeah, but you got to remember, look at all the good things they're doing as well. And at least it kind of takes off a little bit of that heat off of people. And the second thing I was thinking, it's also funny, right? Like I see this happen all the time. I don't know if you do, but I'll be talking to somebody and someone will come up and introduce somebody and they'll say, oh, they're an amazing teacher librarian. And then the teacher librarian will go, no.
Yo, that drives me nuts.
Exactly. It's like, but wait a second. It doesn't make you arrogant, you know. First of all, someone's carrying your banner, someone's giving you a compliment. It's okay to say, hey, thank you. I appreciate that. But, there's a lot of people who will help, but it makes, I appreciate the validation, right? I appreciate the comments or whatever, right? But it's funny because we're the same profession who likes to complain sometimes because we can be a little bit of a whiny bunch that we like to complain that no one appreciates us, that we never noticed. Yeah, you do. It's just when you do, you just miss it, right?
We had the so I actually did a walk about this a couple, maybe last year, the year before, I don't remember when it was, but there's a little girl in our school. Her name is Olivia, and she's just the most incredible little girl. And she would walk around, and every day I'd walk around and I'd tell her, I was proud of her, tell her that she looked beautiful and whatever. And she always said thank you, right? And in my mind, when she said thank you and I saw the smile on her face, all I wanted to do was the next day go and do it again.
Mm-hmm.
Now, conversely, when I tell somebody that they're really good at something, I'm like, man, I'm proud of you. You did such a great job. And they're like, nah, that's just kind of like whatever. It just happened. It just happened. It makes it harder for me to go back the next day and say, hey, what? I'm really proud of you because I know what the response is going to be. And if you know that the response is going to be being pushed off, you're less likely to go and say something positive because it doesn't make you feel good when you say something nice and they're like, well, no, it's not that big a deal. Well, what am I taking the time to tell you about it then? Right? I mean, it is a big deal. And I can keep telling you until you realize that it's a big deal, but it makes it harder to tell you that it's a big deal when you tell me that it's not.
Yeah. Those are great points. So, hey, for our audience members today, good morning, Frank. Good morning, Josh.
Frank's
if you are joining us live today, if you wouldn't mind just throwing in a quick comment in the chat box and let us know you're watching and where you're coming from today. But thank you so much. We appreciate you guys jumping in here every week. I'm sure Josh is probably on a treadmill or an elliptical or pumping some weights somewhere. I know how you are, and that's awesome. So thanks for being here, Josh, and thanks for being such a great supporter of our show. So, and Frank, you too, as always. Frank, I can't even believe you're here. I mean, I saw that tie you wore this week. That almost made me want to throw up. I'm just being really honest. Next week, I'm going to send you a culturized tie. Let's see if we can find you a real tie, one that will actually champion for students every day.
Right,
You'll do right? Mm-hmm. We'll see if we can make that happen.
All right. There's people who will be listening to this now that don't think that you have a culturized tie, and I'm going to tell them right now, like he's probably got 9 of them, and he wrote them off on his taxes.
That's right.
So that's kind of how this works.
That was pretty good tie though. He picked. Did you see that?
It was a nice tie. It was a nice tie. It looked really good. It was solid. Very good. So
hello, Amanda from Long Island, New York. Thanks for joining us today, Amanda. Thank you so much. If you guys have a question or a comment or something you want us to comment on, be sure to throw the comment in the chat box. That would be awesome. But hey, I think Joe and I are going to take a different approach today. So we're going to talk a little bit about amplifying that voice, but there's a couple ways to do that. We're going to talk about it in terms of speaking. We're also going to talk about it in terms of writing, right? And, there's things all the time that people say, if I was interested, Jimmy, if I did want to start dabbling speaking or writing, what's some advice that you would give me, right? And I think Joe and I certainly have some advice. But again, just remember, people, there's a bazillion ways to approach it, right?
Right.
Joe will tell it from his experience. I'll tell it from my experience. Some things will probably overlap. Other things will probably not overlap because they're unique. They're unique to our situations. They're unique to our journey, our path there. So let me just start off by saying this. First of all, when I was a principal, I never in my mind was thinking, oh, someday I want to speak or someday I want to write a book. That, first of all, the writing of the book part was never even on my mind anywhere, ever. I give that credit to Dave Burgess. Dave Burgess is the one that initially reached out to me and said, "Hey, I would love for you to write a book for me." Dave had just originally dove into the publishing business, and I think because a lot of us had that same experience. I had others approach me after speaking from different companies who were maybe interested, but I'll be honest, I didn't think, nah, it's not for me. First of all, I don't like writing. I certainly don't have the confidence in write. I never imagined myself as a writer, so I think part of that caught me off guard. But George Couros is the one that actually initially had encouraged me to write. He had heard me speak in Indianapolis and said, "Hey, aren't you the one who talks about modeling and what we model is what we get? But yet you need to tell that story, Jim. You need to get your voice out there." I was like, so he's the one who encouraged me originally to blog. Ben Gilpin, Joe, I don't know if you know this, but Benji actually is the one who helped me set up my first blog. I remember calling him on a Saturday morning. Yeah. And I'd always read Ben's blog. And so he actually helped me set it up. You know Ben, right? Ben spent like the whole day with me setting it up.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. Talk you through the whole thing, encourage you the whole time.
Yes.
He's brilliant.
Yes, the nicest guy in the world, right?
Right.
And so anyway, started blogging, and that's where Dave saw my blog and said, "Hey, I think you have a story here. I think you need to amplify that voice. I think it needs to be in writing." And so, there are people out there who certainly see the value in you, and we all bring value. And if people are interested in either speaking or writing, what I would say is just start getting into it, dabble into it a little bit, right? There's different ways to do that. So I'll come back and circle back on the writing part, but I'm going to let you, Joe, talk a little bit about the speaking part. But here's the only thing I'll say is that when I think back to my career, I actually really did start speaking and teaching and doing those things at a young age, only because I became a principal at a young age.
Right.
And I really wanted to pay it forward, and I wanted to help other people who aspired for that position. But I tell people all the time, I spoke for 18 years and never got paid a penny for doing it. Mm-hmm. And actually oftentimes would pay my own way to a conference or something like that, submit a proposal, pay my way there and speak. And I still remember my first, I started with colleges, speaking to new teachers, speaking to teachers who were, or aspiring teachers, I should say, and then aspiring leaders and all those things for my state organization. But I still remember the first national conference I spoke at. I got the 3:30 time slot in San Diego, by the way, in case you're wondering what was that. And 7 people came to my session. And I was jacked up, Joe. I didn't care if it was 7 people or 70 people, 700 or 7,000. It was all the same to me. So, and it still is today. And that's why I know, like, you find something you love, because it doesn't matter how many people in the room. It's just an opportunity to teach and share your experiences and hope you can inspire others to want to do the same.
Yeah. So my takeaway from that whole thing is you started off with, I'm going to say one thing, and then went for 7 minutes. So that's great. Like that. So I don't know if I'm encouraged that the idea that you're not going to talk anymore, or the fact, like, my God, I'm glad you didn't do 3 things. We'd be here.
Joe, tell me how you really feel right now. Joe,
I love that.
Actually, you know what? Let me show you how to take. Let me model for you. Let me just model for you real quick, Joe. Yeah. You know how you're telling earlier how to model when you get a compliment? Let me show you how to model when you get dissed. Okay, watch this. Thank you, Joe.
It's the same thing. It's the same thing. I think it's funny that people think that. I wonder if they just talk like this, like, just for the show. This is how we do this literally every day. This is every phone call, every text, every Voxer message is this. Like, so this is kind of how it works. But you nailed it, honestly, my man. You nailed it, because that's essentially how I think we all started in the conversation. I think there's a balance, for me doing speaking and being a superintendent for the last 12 years, and probably speaking for the last 8 of those years, was really about the balance between making sure that we were doing it the right way, in that we were trying to amplify the voices of everybody around us, and making sure that we could put ourselves in a situation that we could just get them into spaces, and then all of a sudden we're all getting into more spaces, which was really cool. But I did the same thing when I had this desire. You know what's funny? I just thought of this. It was so ironic that I just thought of this right now. I was interviewing for my first principal position, and I think at that point I had spoken to a couple of groups just about leadership and that kind of thing. It's always like, Chris Farley down, Van Down by the River, motivational speaking guy kind of thing. And one of the follow-up questions in my first principal interview in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, was from a guy named Andrew. And he said, if you were given the chance to be this principal or to speak, what would you choose? And I said, well, that's like, I said, I don't know if I can answer that question, because if I'm out there speaking, what am I really speaking about? And I think the idea that the leadership piece of it, I think, is the hub of what you want to do. If you don't have anything to talk about, what are we really doing here? And we had that conversation, and I'm like, I would love both of them, and I got a chance to do both of them for a very long time, which was just unbelievably humbling to me. But the idea, just in terms of the logistics of speaking or bringing the messages forward that hopefully we can help people with, is again, you're right, Jimmy. You do everything you can to get into places to just practice. And I think one of the things that's been really important for me is that you come into a core message, whatever that core message is. If it's got 3 points, if it's got 4 points, if it's got 2 points, whatever the case may be. I wouldn't do more than that. But if you've got 2, 3, 4 core messages that you want to get out, you put that into a situation where you've got your core messages, and then you bring stories within the context of those messages, but then also calls to action with those 4 messages, or 3 messages for me, that you can get out that would help people out. And I think the problem that I don't know if I don't want to say it like this. So the thing that I keep in mind is I don't want to be the quote guy, right? Like, I just showed a quote and there it is. Like, now you're inspired. If you're going to show the quote, if you're going to, give the idea, not only do you have to give the idea, but the context by which the idea came and what that person can do to make sure that they can utilize it in their particular space, right? Like, it can't be about the one guy that the bald guy told the jokes, right? It's got to be about what can we do to make sure that when they leave, they feel better about the work that they do, and B, are inspired to do something more to really connect and feel better about the work that they're going to do in the future. And so I think a lot of times I love it when people get excited about, about the session or the keynote or whatever. But I follow up often with, what does it look like for you? Right? Where did you see yourself in that? And the best part is when they come up to me and they say, oh, we do this. Oh, we do that. Oh, we do that. Oh, we did like half of the stuff that we do like half of the stuff that you're talking about, but I didn't realize it because, you just brought it up in a way that made it feel better. And I'm like, well, see, so maybe you go back to work tomorrow and feel good about the work that you're currently doing because you're excited about it now. Nothing's changed, right? So how do you get that stuff going forward? So I would get 3 or 4 core messages, a story that connects those core messages to the audience. And then finally, how do you make sure that they can go out and do the work that you're talking about in a way that makes them feel more valued for the work that they're doing and helps them amplify the voices of those that they serve in that space?
Yeah, I like that. It's funny, right? I've never heard you actually talk about this. I mean, you and I talk about things, but never like
Right.
that, right? So I'm just sitting here listening and processing that and reflecting on myself, to be honest with you. Like, what am I doing, right? And it's funny, right? Even though you and I have done this for a long time, it's again another example. We're all evolving. We're just evolving and trying to figure it out. And I don't think anyone has a monopoly on it. But I do think there are things that we can learn from others and watching them speak. Also, we've talked about that a little bit, the importance of seeing other people speak. Right. So, Joe, you said something, you talked about practicing. I think that is a huge thing as well, right? First of all, a lot of people, including probably us when we first started, this fear of being in front of people and speaking, because let's be honest, you're really vulnerable in that position. Yeah. You're constantly reading the audience. You're wondering if they're even paying attention. You got, guys sitting in the front row like this, who doesn't want to be there. You walk into a space and everybody sits way in the back, and now people are all over, and it's just kind of weird. And so there's all these different things that run through your head, right? And so, but the practicing, because it is a skill, is we just got to get in front of audiences. And that's what I try to tell people a lot of times. Look, you just got to get in front of audience. And because the more you do it, it is about practicing, the more confident you'll become. Joe, I can still remember probably in the whole first year that I did this, because I didn't have that confidence and I was always worried I was going to mess up. I would literally either have to carry an iPad with me so I could look at the notes, or I would go, I constantly had to be looking at some notes. Like, what am I going to say about this? And I'd get nervous, like I'm going to forget, I'm going to say something. So
yeah,
I don't think that's something that people need to feel badly about. I think it's okay to go say, I've got some
absolutely.
notes. I want to keep myself focused. I've got 3 things I want to talk about today. So in case you see me looking down or whatever, that's what I'm doing, because I want to make sure I deliver a strong, practical message for you, or whatever happens to be the case. But I think the practicing is the key. So here's some things to think about. I think I already mentioned a couple of them, but one way to do that is, okay, where do I practice? Well, first of all, if you are a teacher, you are practicing every day because you have a group of students. And I don't know what tougher audience there is than that, people. So you're already off to a good start, right? If you're a principal, you're in front of your faculty. So practice your presentations in a faculty meeting, right? Get your 3 or 4 things that Joe talked about. Get your stories, see if you can come across and see if you can actually move that audience and influence that audience right there in your own building. Number 2, maybe you're meeting with a group of students. Maybe you're meeting with a group of parents. All those are opportunities to really practice. Local universities are a great place. People, they need support. So reach out and say, hey, I'm a teacher here. I'm a principal here. I'm a superintendent here. And I believe I got some messages that I could, even give to your student teachers, right? We see student teachers in our building. I'd love to come out and share 3 or 4 things that what we see in teaching and instruction, those types of things. There's also your state organizations. I think state organizations are a great way to get connected. It's another way to network. So you kind of get a double dose there. You're networking and you're still getting opportunities, especially if you're willing to do it for free, right?
Yes.
Submit proposals to conferences, whether they're state, regional, local, or even national conferences. Do that. And again, it might take you some money to get out there, but it is worth the experience. Again, you're networking, you're supporting your organizations. And by the way, let me just say this. I'm a believer that everybody should be a part of their state national organizations. I just am. I think we need to support our profession. And so for principals out there, superintendents or teachers, whatever your state organization is, or whatever your national organization is, at least begin to have conversations with your district to see if they would support some of those expenses to be part of that. There is a lot of professional development that's offered. So I think if you research it, hopefully your district is willing to pay for that. But if not, it still may be even worth it to pay it out of your own pocket. And I know a lot of people do. And then the last thing I'd say is maybe even community groups. I mean, there are always local community organizations that need lunchtime speakers and so forth. And it's a great way to network and share your story from your school and get out there and let people know who you are. And so these are opportunities that maybe that we just take the initiative on. I do worry sometimes, Joe, that people want to do it for the first time and they want to go, I always say, please do not quit your job, right? You have an experience. Yes, it's awesome. So here's one thing to think about. I call it the 550 rule. Okay. I don't even think I've ever shared this with you, Joe. Maybe I have. The 550 rule means this. And here's what I want people to think about who go speak. If you're thinking about doing this on a more regular basis, if you're not, don't worry about it, right? But these are the people out there who might be thinking, I'd like to do more of that. I'd like to get out there. Some people are even considering maybe leaving their profession. So everybody's in a different level right now when it comes to going out and speaking. The 550 rule says this. And again, you can create your own rule, but this is just mine. Is the 550 rule means that when I go out and I speak, okay, actually it's a 50-50. I don't even know what I'm talking about. 50-50. I know, got my head.
This is going really well so far. I've got 125, 76.5 rule.
72.
I have a 17.4, 36.25 rule. It's like now it's all of a sudden out of like legislation.
Yeah, Joe has one rule. Joe has one rule, and his is the 666 because he's a freaking devil some days. The 50-50 rule, sorry. 50-50 rule is that if I speak to 100 in an audience, if I speak to 100, here's a way you can test it. If your message is strong enough, if you're thinking about, hey, I want to go do this more permanently. Yeah, it was the 550 rule, Joe. It was. I had it right the first time. Now start it. Anyway, bottom line is this.
Just wake me up when it's done, please.
Well, because I know what happened. But here's this. 5%, 100 people in the room. 5% of the room will inquire about you perhaps speaking or want some information. So that would be 5 people out of the 100. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then 50% of that, you should be able to get an engagement.
Right.
So,
And that makes perfect sense.
That's how you see it.
Does.
So that would be like two people. If you spoke to 100 people, if you can't get 2 contracts out of that, then something's not right with the message, or something's not right with the delivery, or whatever. And again, it's not a perfect system, but it sets a kind of a goal for yourself to see, because how do you sustain it then? I mean, you can't do this for a job or a side hustle if you can't get 1 or 2 inquiries, or excuse me, in this case, contracts actually. But so 5% and then 50% of that 5%.
Right. That makes sense. So the other thing that you mentioned that I think is really important for people is, well,
I'm sorry, Joe. I'm loving it. Josh Tovar says, "Andale, Jimmy." My man. Josh. Ándale, cuate. ¿Qué pasa? Jimmy, mira, cállate, porque no sabes lo que estás hablando.
That's good. You guys want a little time here? All right.
Josh,
so
you and I just go back and forth. Let's just ignore Joe, or Joe.
That's good. Good.
Joe be over here going, taco.
Yeah, no, I'm not getting into it. I'm not getting into it. That's right. Good. So the idea that I think a lot of people, when they talk to me about it, when they bring it up, they want to speak, they want to go do events, and I'm like, that's great. The more that you can practice, the more opportunities you have. And we'll practice. I practice in the car. Like, honestly, I'd hold a phone up to my ear so I didn't look like an idiot when I was just talking, right? You know what I mean? But now I just like talk. So now just talk. And hopefully you keep kind of getting that message in a way that keeps getting repeatable, which is interesting, because when I talk to school districts about, telling the story of their space and whatever, I always talk about simple, unique, and repeatable, right? What is your message? Is it simple? Is it unique? And is it repeatable? And until just now, I didn't even think about it. It's the same concept when you go out and you speak to a group. Is the work that is what you get out there, is it simple? Is it unique to you? And is it repeatable when they leave that space? And I think that's been a big deal for us, because we want to make sure that we can continue to get opportunities. But if they want to come and if somebody comes and asks me about curriculum design or learning spaces or stuff, they're not going to get it. It's not going to be good. It's because I'm not good at that stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we want to talk about culture, we want to talk about telling stories of schools, we want to talk about amplifying voices, that kind of stuff. That's a different conversation. But here's the key. The key is you want to practice as much as you can, because it's just like everything else in terms of getting out there. You're not going to get a ton of shots at this thing. Like if somebody's going to see you in a spot, and when they see you, if they're like, oh my goodness, like that's incredible, then they're going to want to bring you to their space or whatever the case may be, or suggest that you go somewhere else or whatever. But if the message isn't clear and they walk out, it's that, remember we were talking about the whole Seinfeld thing? Like when you cut the Seinfeld show off and short, as opposed to going for another year, when they walk out and go, that's the best thing I've seen in a long time. That's different than if they walk out and say, that was pretty good. Right? You know what I mean? So when you get to what your message is and you keep coming back to it, and there were a lot of times where I felt like I was saying the same thing, and I still am, right? Because I know that when I say these things that they work. Like, I can prove it because our group did it. And if you do it, you're going to feel better about the work that you do in your space. And so why wouldn't we keep going in that whole evergreen mentality? Like it still works. So I think we want to be really clear about, the more practice that you get, you're going to feel more confident when you get to a spot where there are more people in one space. That means, doing if I was doing a group, working with a group of 15 in a session, I'm going to go with the same energy. I'm going to go with the same slide. I'm going to go with the same concepts, because maybe one person in there would be willing to have me come to another group. But even if they don't, it gives me 60 minutes to practice that message in front of a group of people. So when next time I have 20, or the next time when I have 30, or the next time when I have 7, but all 7 of those people are influencers in a way that they bring me to their district, now all of a sudden we've got some momentum. So I think you got to be really, people want it right away, but I'd be real hesitant to want it right away until you have it clear, the message clear enough where it's good enough where they want to bring you back to something else. If I got a keynote in like my first 3 years that I was doing this, like a big keynote, like a state event or something like that, I honestly, I probably would have crashed and burned, because I remember what I used to do, 8-9 years ago. And it was more about flash and quotes rather than content and feeling. That was, it just wasn't great. Right. And now I feel like it's a little bit better in that there's more, there's more structure to it. But if that was my shot 8 years ago, and I wanted it right away, I don't know if I'd be still doing it, to be really honest, Jimmy. I mean, like, you got to just get really consistent with the message.
And as far as the platform goes, I was thinking that I remember starting off with PowerPoint, and then there was a time I went to Google, and then I eventually went to Keynote. And so, at least from when I went from Google to Keynote, I've saved every presentation I've ever done.
Correct. Yep.
And every now and then I'll just pull it up and go like 2014, and I'll just look at it and I'll go, oh my God, I'm almost horrified, right? But it shows our growth, right? Our evolution through the years. And a lot of people have helped me with different things, especially when it comes to imagery or the way the slides look or the timing of it, or because there's a storytelling component to it as well, right? It can't just be stories and stories and stories. That story has to relate to something, some concept that you're trying to teach, and you're trying to make the connections. And I've always found, Joe, at least for me, people who are really good storytellers or really good presenters, especially if they can tie it back to something and really drive the point home, right? And that's a gift for a lot of people. But for other people, it's just a lot of practice. They've just gotten better at it and better at it. And so it's one of those things, again, just to reiterate, to get out in front of people. And then those are the things that need to happen. So I'm going to share just a couple things for maybe the audience to think about. If you want just a few more things that maybe you can think about and consider. Number one, and I think this goes both, Joe, to both speaking and writing. So let's say if you're interested in writing a book, I think it's the same things to consider. Number one, is your story or your presentation or your book, whatever, is it simple? In other words, when people hear it, is it something they can relate to? Is it like almost like it's approachable? Like it's not something so complex, something so confusing. I do worry sometimes that some people are way out here, and that's all right. But I think for a lot of audiences, they want to be able to relate to it, right? What is going to be different about your presentation, or what is going to be different about your book that isn't already out there? Is it the exact same presentation? Is it the exact same book? And I've always said this, look, if I'm going to write a book on culture, well, obviously, which I have, I read Todd Whitaker's book, right? I read these books to say, well, what could I offer? What could I say that they haven't already said, right? Like, why would anyone care what I have to say? But I think the benefit of that is it benefits us in a couple of ways. Number one, it allows us to get some research and also then to use some sources that we can cite in our own books. But it also gives us some things to reflect on, because we don't necessarily agree with everything that somebody else writes or says. And so we can talk about those things, but maybe we can identify a different angle or a different twist or a whole different idea on those things. So I do think looking at similar work that you're doing helps your work, right? Because you know what people are doing out there. Most of us have some sort of expertise. I'm not talking this whole idea of imposter syndrome, but at the end of the day, everybody has talent. You have some sort of expertise, or you wouldn't be in front of kids in a classroom. You wouldn't be running a building or district. So we're not saying you're here for all of us. We're not that arrogant, but we do have some sort of expertise that we bring to the audience. And just always remember that. And I think that will help develop some confidence in people. Joe, you kind of already mentioned this. What's kind of the takeaways? What do you want people leaving with that maybe they can implement right away? What's something, in other words, if I go and speak, one of the things I always think about is when a teacher leaves my speaking, will they walk back to the classroom and be a better teacher for it? Will they walk back to the buildings and be a better leader for it? Whether I'm writing or speaking, that's what I'm always thinking is how can I actually help them become better versions of themselves? And so that's one thing I'm always thinking about when I'm writing or preparing to talk, right? What is there's an emotional component, Joe, and you're amazing at this, but that emotion, that rawness, that vulnerability, and that authenticity of a speaker, because to me, it's still about connections. People want to be able to connect to a speaker. They want to connect to a book. I know I'm reading a book right now, and and I love it, right? Because I can hear and feel the voice of the author. And so I love books like that get me almost emotional as I listen or I read something. And then stories, you mentioned that, right? Is it relatable? Can we relate the stories back to perhaps experiences that our audience has had? And so they can relate to it. And speaking of audience, that would be the last thing is, who is your audience? You have to know who your audience is when you go in to write or you go in to speak, because you don't want to miss it because we weren't sure who our audience was. So make sure you do some background information. Make sure you understand the culture, the current climate of that community or the people you're trying to write for. But those are some things hopefully you can think about as you're putting together a presentation, or you're getting perhaps thinking about even writing a book or something like that. Those are certainly some things that people can think about.
Yeah, I agree with all of it. And it's so funny that we were talking about simple, unique, and repeatable. And again, until literally 5 minutes ago or whenever I said it, I never really connected it to it's the same thing with speaking, which it should, it makes perfect sense. Because if you're trying to, help a group or connect a group to the work that you're currently doing or the work that you want to get out there, if it's simple, unique, and repeatable in a school, then they're going to talk about you differently. If you're a speaker and it's simple, unique, and repeatable, then they're going to talk about you differently. It makes perfect sense. So I think the more that you can get yourself into that situation where you can see some of those things, I think you're going to find yourself in a great spot. But it comes down to the connection that you can make with the people that you're with in that situation. And that's through the story, but it's also, what are you providing? What value are you providing for them for when they walk away? Are they going to feel like they can do it? Or are they going to feel like what they're doing already has value? That's the other thing, Jimmy, is it doesn't always need to be something new. If you're out there and your messages are out there, if it's your book or if it's your speaking, you mentioned that what's your unique take on it. But if there are things in the book that you believe are helpful that you haven't seen out there before, and they read them and like, oh, I do something similar to that, it just reinforces the idea that they're doing great work already, right? So the more that we can figure out ways to connect them to things that that they're already done, it's like it's easier for people to move if they connect it to something that they're already doing, as opposed to thinking that they have to start from scratch.
Yeah.
How many times do we start stuff and you don't see the momentum, so then you just forget it, you just leave it, right? But if you can, if the message that you have, if what you're talking about in terms of what we model is what we get, and then they take that back and look at it like, yeah, well, you know what, this is every interaction gives me this opportunity to do that, then they're already halfway there because they see it in the current work that they're doing. If we say, well, now you got to go get a brand new podcasting platform and you got to get this equipment and you got to get this and you got to get that, they're like, oh my gosh, like, where am I going to find the time for all that stuff? And then they're less likely to do it, or they buy all the stuff and at the same time, then they don't figure out ways to really kind of move it forward. Then they're like, forget it. After 3 months, they wasted all kinds of money. Right. Yeah. So when you connect it to something that they're already doing, or where they're already kind of moving forward, they're much more likely to continue to see it through and to amplify it, because it doesn't feel like such a big lift.
Yeah. I was thinking as you were saying that, Joe, as we're talking here and sharing these thoughts, is that there's one thing I know that you and I both struggle with. And as I was reflecting out there just for a second at the end, I don't know of anybody who hasn't struggled this, who's in the education world. And that is the hardest part for me, honestly. Actually, I shouldn't say the hardest, but one of the hardest things is I have to realize that if you're one of those people who wants to go out and do more of this, or even thinking I could do this maybe, is the business side of it. Oh. And that was really hard for us, because there is a business component to this. And I still remember the first time someone asked me to come speak and said, well, how much would you charge? Like, nobody had really ever asked me that. Like, would you come speak? Sure. And I just go, right? But this person said, well, how much would you charge? And I thought, charge? No, I mean, I don't know. Just pay my gas and feed me. And but I remember thinking about that and reaching out to a couple of people and trying to figure out, well, what is that, right? Because it's the business side that gets kind of weird, because we're not business people, we're educators, right? And so that part can mess you up a little bit sometimes. So, you know, whatever that is, when you have to figure out, well, you mean I have to send invoices and I have to write contracts, and I have to, you know, I have to figure out, you know, how do I negotiate that? And that's really weird for me to negotiate it, right? I'm negotiating something, and you know, here's 3 districts over in my state that's asked me to come speak, and now I'm trying to negotiate. It's just, it gets weird sometimes. And so the
But
one
you have
thing
to believe in the message.
Yeah. And so if you are to the point, you know, and people always ask, well, what should I charge? And I was like, well, what's the value of, you know, what is that value you're bringing? And by the way, how much, what's the price on being away from your family? What's the price on trying to manage multiple things? What's the price on your stress and trying to do all this? So there's no easy answers to that, but I share that with people. If there are people who are thinking about, you know, whether it's Joe or myself, I know we'd be open to chatting with you. So just reach out if we can help some way in that regard. Because, you know, Joe and I certainly want to help. We want to support, and nothing gets me more excited than watching other people be successful. So if we can help in some way, don't hesitate to reach out.
I will tell you this. I just want to close with this, and I'll let you close it. But the one thing that I do want to say is that, you know, a lot of times we feel like, does the message have value? Does the message have value? And the most nerve-wracking audience in the world, without question, I'll go out. I said it every year. I would go out and speak to, you know, 2,000 people, 3,000 people, 500 people at a clip without hesitation, right? And then I'd get into the auditorium in Fall Creek, Wisconsin, with 70 people that I see every day, and I've never been more nervous. Because you can't, it's never a bit. It's always like, you can't be a production. It's got to be real, and it's got to be authentic. And I always think about that when I go somewhere else. What would my staff feel about what I'm saying? Because if I can lean into it that way, it changes the way that I project, because I know that the most nerve-wracking place in the world for me is sitting in front of those people that I see every day, because I can't be fake with them. I can't be, you know, I can't just say a bunch of stuff and leave it go. It's got to be real. It's got to be from the heart. It's got to be something that's actually happening. So when I go places, and I would take them with me, and we'd take teachers, we took them all over the place, took them all over the country, and they get a chance to see the keynote, or they get a chance to see the session. And then people would ask them, is this really like what it is? And when they said yes, I don't know if I have ever had a better feeling when it comes down to the speaking piece. When people ask your group if that's what it's really like there, and they say yes, or they say, yeah, like he's that loud, right? Like, then all of a sudden it changes the way that you go out there, because it's more confidence. So please, whatever you decide that you want to do when it comes down to speaking or writing or anything to get the voice out there, when it's authentic, and you know you could stand in front of the group that you serve and give the same presentation, and they would react in a way that made them feel good about the work that they do, you're going to be in a good spot. So you shouldn't be nearly as nervous in front of however many people are in that space.
I started laughing when you said, is he really that way? And they said, yeah, he literally comes to the school like at 6 a.m, and he just sits in the parking van. It's so weird. It's like the weirdest thing. Joe is really like, he really has, and he really just sits in the parking lot. See, there you go.
Good. Yeah, that's great. Way to bring it all back, Jimmy. That a boy. Thank you very much. This is my bubble bursting up here. Fantastic. It's good. But you've been in the spot with my group, and you know, that's the best feeling for me. It really is. I tell our group, like, if you feel the way that I feel when I talk about you, then I win.
Yeah.
That's all there is to it.
That's a great reminder for all of us. If you are a school or campus leader and you have the opportunity to take staff with you,
yes,
and have the opportunity to listen to people speak and have conversations, or even present at a conference as a team and give people that experience, it's awesome, right?
It's amazing.
Here's why. For those of you who want to speak, have thought about it, or are currently out there, those who are currently out there already know this. And Joe, you and I have said this a million times, and obviously we're no longer practitioners, but you know, you are just literally months out of it. But the idea was this: I still know this, that every time I would go out and speak, no matter how tired I was, no matter what kind of day I had, no matter how much I felt beat up, no matter whatever, as soon as I got done speaking, I couldn't wait to get back to work, because I'd come back jacked and inspired. And not only that, I'd always reflect, am I that same person who I was in the audience? Because that's who I want to be in my building every day.
Right.
And so it holds us accountable to be the best versions of ourselves. So, hey, listen, thank you, everybody. We're going to wrap this up. We appreciate you joining Joe and myself on the weekly show. You got it. We have no idea what the hell we're talking about,
but we keep coming back.
We find some value in it. And with all sincerity, I know Joe and I mean this. God bless you. Thank you so much for your continued support. We love you. And if there's anything we can do to help, we hope you won't reach out, or you won't hesitate to reach out to either Joe or myself. Okay. God bless. Joe, it's always good to see you, my friend.
Take care, my man. Always good. Always good.
All right.